Welcome to Prime Suspects for your weekly insider's look behind the counter of Prime Sports. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics: the Thanksgiving football weekend that was, some eye-opening movement in the market to make the college football playoff, and new comments on the future of consolidation in the sports betting space and what it may mean for both leading brands as well as challenger brands. Guys, kicking it off with the latest from Inside Prime Sports, and Adam, turning it over to you first. As always, this was a unique slate in the NFL this past week. 3 games on Thanksgiving, then a standalone game on Black Friday, prior to that bigger card on Sunday, plus Monday Night Football as usual. So with all that considered, how would you say the average handle was per game compared to a typical week?
So again, Thursday games, Friday games, handle was up. When you have these single games, especially, I looked at the charts before that Detroit game and it was good handle. And then as that game finishes, the other one bumps. And then in play takes another level as well when these games are going on. We had a huge weekend in Ohio, shitty weekend in New Jersey. But, those are the way it falls. A lot of the traders were kind of happy with Ohio. But when we drilled down to it, it was more about one game, which was an obvious game to be against Ohio on the weekend for. But yeah, using the circus of either 13A, 13B. 13A was good volume, good action, good results. 13B, little less action, not very good results. And, that's how the weekend ended up.
When we have a run like we did of quite a few underdogs covering, but favorites winning outright, thinking Detroit, Dallas, Green Bay, then Kansas City on Friday, pulling another rabbit out of their hat. How does that trickle over into the Sunday slate when it comes to the volume that you're seeing? If a lot of recreational bettors are hitting money line parlays or a lot of pros maybe hitting underdogs, I imagine some of the bettors on both sides of the spectrum were a little bit more flush once we rolled around to the more conventional weekend slate.
Well, there was just so many games. In this week with the college basketball, the college football, the NFL, four days of games over 5 days. When you spread it out like that and you have games individually, that's where you really see the in-play flourish. And then the pre-game stuff, again, going Saturday night into Sunday, NFL volume wasn't, recognizable as a normal Sunday. But that's kind of this time of year as well, when you have NHL as well, NBA as well. There's just so much on. But the Sunday results were good for the recreational players. And obviously they'll, hopefully be coming in this week with their pockets full.
And it's a big week in both the NFL and the college ranks. A lot of eyes on the college football playoff as that picture begins to crystallize. So guys, let's move on into our water cooler segment. And to kick it off, per an ESPN article published yesterday, written by David Purdom, there was some big early week action when it came to fringe contenders' odds to make the playoff. The market seemed bullish on Alabama, moving from plus 105 to minus 200 at ESPN Bet. SMU also a minus 240 favorite to make the playoff, despite only being favored in the range of minus 135 over Clemson in the ACC title game. The market also seemed bearish on teams like South Carolina, Miami, and Ole Miss. And of note, the article was published, and thus those odds were quoted before last night's CFP rankings release. So it sounds like the early bettors were ahead of the curve, especially when it came to that Alabama-Miami debate. Adam, we'll stick with you for a moment here. Based on the rankings released last night or any other early week action, any noteworthy risers or fallers at Prime when it comes to teams to make the college football playoff?
So first of all, this is a bit of a downer because this is an argument I've been in with our traders for some time. They didn't have anything up this week. They haven't put anything up the last 3 weeks on making the playoffs. And this is where, having 2 or 3 teams up would be perfectly fine. They're looking to put the whole slate up. And this is where a differentiation versus what really needs to be up versus some of those low-hanging fruits that kind of get left behind. Regarding the odds, the Alabama one was just a mistake. Just purely, if Texas wins that game, does that mean Georgia actually goes behind Alabama because they lost to them earlier in the season? This is where I think while we had this when there was 2 teams, we had this when there's 4 teams, we're still going to have this when there's 12 teams, about having an idea of what the weight of body of work and all this shit, and few humans on a panel voting ultimately what their opinion is on this as well. You'll get the straight up champions of each of the conferences. But then also, is it better that Alabama didn't make the SEC game And that means whoever the loser is in that game can actually fall behind them because they didn't lose this week. They actually didn't do anything. And that's ultimately where I think a lot of people saw this with the Alabama. For me, straight up just a bad odds put up on the board, and people took advantage of it and got it to a place where it should be at the end of the day.
Joe, tucking at a thread Adam kind of hinted at, what's your point of view on a market that's decided largely by a selection committee as opposed to something decided solely on the field?
I mean, when you look at the initial college football rankings that came out, I mean, you just start at the top. When you look at the top 4 seeds right now, all right, you can say Texas, traditional football school. You can say Oregon, all right, Nouveau, big football school. But when you see Boise, great mid-major, and SMU, I mean, SMU was great back before they had the Death Valley. See those 2 teams ahead of all the play-in teams that you've got here. It's unreal. To Adam's point, like you can expand it to 4 teams, 8 teams, 12 teams. Like when we do the NCAA basketball tournament, they get a whole couple of weeks out of that. And that's like 62 teams plus play-in teams and all that. So there's never going to be anything definitive. The one thing you know is that these guys have got one eye on the matchups and the rankings and another eye on the TV ratings, because remember that this is a business. And looking at the initial play-in rounds, you got to say that that's what's really going to win out here. I mean, you could go through, and if it was just based on record and everything like that, you can juice the numbers in any way possible to justify any team. A lot of this is going to be done largely on sentiment. Adam was right about Alabama was going to be in regardless. They're the marquee team in college football for the last 10, 15 years. Seeing that Notre Dame getting rewarded for having an 11-1 regular season, but being prohibited from being one of those top 4 teams by the rules, catches Alabama in the first round. What was second prize? Catching the Philadelphia Eagles? Pretty unreal. It's great Barstool talk. I'm not entirely unhappy that we didn't have the markets to make the college playoffs. There might have been a lot of turnover. I think we might have kind of taken it in the shorts in the end, but when public sentiment is up against a committee that's made up largely of people from the power conferences, you're going to see power conference teams throughout. And just looking at the way this could potentially play out, like, yeah, we could potentially have no, we can't, but we could have three of the 4 teams, 3 of the 4 final teams be SEC teams.
And I guess a little bit of a look ahead question within this segment before we move on to our more standard look ahead for the week. Jump ball to either of you guys. What kind of action do you expect once we get to the college football playoff this year compared to last year's playoff, given the expansion from 4 teams up to 12?
And this is great for bookies. Great for bookies. And it's also good for bettors. But the more games, the better. These singled out games, again, they're going to be scheduled apart of each other. People are going to be able to watch one. And again, this is where ultimately the in-play betting really trumps pre-game betting. And this is sort of the direction that the whole thing's going, is you don't have to be married to a side or a spread or anything in the beginning. You have all these hundreds and hundreds of options throughout the game as the ball swings to where it is. But I suspect that if anyone's tracking, single game records or single game volumes and all those kind of things, they're going to surpass all those previous ones as they go into this season of playoffs of the college.
Yeah, and I got to imagine that Notre Dame, which is the biggest public team, they have their own network, against Alabama, which is the marquee team. If that isn't the most bet college game of the season up to that point, I'd really be surprised.
Well, guys, from the pecking order atop college football to the pecking order in the regulated U.S. sports betting space, we'll move on to our look ahead segment for the week. Some new comments early in the week from DraftKings CEO Jason Robbins, claiming challenger brands in the U.S. will, quote, figure out how to survive at smaller levels of scale, unquote. And in saying this, suggesting his company and FanDuel will retain their stranglehold in this space. Joe, would love to get your point of view on his position that further consolidation will come at the top of the market and what that could mean for the ability of other brands to operate at lower levels of scale.
Can I say I found this observation by Mr. Robbins to be extremely weird? What company in a dominant position looks at the little guys behind him? He's got a big company in front of him. Like, what's he going to do about FanDuel? Okay. Worrying about saying oh, well, all those guys that are behind us, the little small fry, they'll find a way to eke out a living, but it's us 2 big guys. Like FanDuel, if I was FanDuel, if I was Amy House sitting next to him, I'd be laughing at him. We're not FanDuel. We're number 1. You're looking at our ass. What are you going to do to catch up to us? What do you care about Prime and whatever? And I take it like he's constantly saying stuff about the smaller companies. And I think it's out. I honestly think he's insecure because he's an American. He knows the American technology scene as well as anybody. If there's one thing, it's disruptors come up from behind you in the jungle. And this is where old lions die in the jaw of young lions. And there's somebody who's going to be there. I'm not saying that it's us or whomever, but it's also incredibly disrespectful because there's a small fry in the back here called Bet365, which is bigger than those two companies. That if Denise Coates ever cracks her knuckles and decides to get serious about America, she will eat DraftKings alive and be probably overhauling FanDuel immediately. You can make a case that if the casino companies, Caesars, MGM, did a better job of utilizing their resources and the natural advantages that they have, they could go a lot further, eat into that lead. The sports adjacent guys like ESPN and FanDuel, ESPN Bet should be doing much better. We've talked about that before. If they really got serious about that and really wanted to make a go of it, there's no reason why that can't be the Sky Bet of the United States and do that well. The likelihood that there's something that none of us know about right now that's going to sneak up behind everybody and clobber them, that's the most likely result. But a guy who sits there who's number 2 and he's talking about number 3 through 10 instead of talking about number 1, I just got to kind of wonder, why is he wasting his time?
And Joe, I'm intrigued by your mention of Bet365 over the course of that answer, because I listened to an episode of the Better Life podcast earlier this week, Timothy Lawson interviewing Captain Jack Andrews. And Captain Jack's take was that Bet365 is just so big on a global basis that they can afford to sit on their hands a bit and just let the US market kind of run its course and pick their spot in terms of when they may want to pounce. Is it fair to think that for all the talk of DraftKings and FanDuel at the top, perhaps Bet365 could be a bit of a sleeping giant when it comes to the US space?
Bet365 is a sleeping giant. I don't know why they haven't. They're licensed. They made it through the door. Any concerns about like, oh, well, we want to keep a low profile, like that ended when they had to go through licensing. They know about Denise. They know about their businesses in the rest of the world. Regulators know about it. And apparently the states that license them are okay with it. So take the gloves off, 365. What are you waiting for? You're getting taunted by some guy, oh, the small fry. Like, I don't know what the competitive nature is like up there in Stoke-on-Trent, but if I heard that and I was Denise Coates, I would be like, all right, we're increasing our marketing budget by 1,000% and we're going to eat that guy alive. Him and his little public company, we're going to eat him alive. And we're not going to stop until we're chasing FanDuel down as well. I don't know what they're waiting for. Maybe Adam, has a better idea since he's close to the ground and the global bookmakers network has a better idea of what they're waiting for. But to me, I'm incredulous.
Yeah, Adam, I'm going to call an audible here. I was prepared to ask you for your thoughts on any implications, Robbins' comments, if they have merit, what that could mean for the Prime Sports business plan. I'm going to assume that you would chalk it up as a nothing burger and not have too much to add there. Correct me if I'm wrong. But beyond that, curious to pass it over to you to build on anything that stands out to you from what Joe has mentioned so far with regard to this situation.
So no, I wasn't going to call this one a nothing burger. I actually had quite a few things.
Okay, let's go.
I wanted to thank Jason for the time he must have attended the Prime Sports earnings call, investors call, because he literally said what we've been saying for 2 or 3 years now. Yeah, you can build a nice little company. You don't have to be, sitting at the top to make a good earning for owners, investors, employees, all those kind of things. Something different, bringing stuff in-house, owning your own tech. That's what we've done for a number of years right now. For me, Joe kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, what's he looking at? DraftKings have no competitors. DraftKings is its own animal. They're a fantasy company that went public and have built themselves into a gaming company. They're not competing with FanDuel. FanDuel was acquired by a behemoth of the planet, and they're not a competitor, right? Yes, they're fighting for the top 1 market share in that, but ultimately they're not in the same realm, because you've got a true 1980s Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul of how to consider these two comparing themselves to each other. The brick and mortars, they've put the sports books back in the corner. They're not They're all waiting for iGaming. Everybody's waiting for iGaming, and we keep talking about sports betting, which does bring along Bet365. They've just been sitting there. They're seeing what they're spending. I mean, you can look at their numbers. You can see they're spending a lot of money. Their trading's going up, all these kind of aspects of it. But unfortunately, and this is what I've come to learn more the last few months, is these early onset companies have ruined the American bettor and the American customer. That the first thing you get asked before they even sign up is, what can you give me? And Bet365 is not really from that nature either, of just wanting to give everything without getting something. So they're waiting for that kind of bonus rolls and all those kind of things just to roll back a little bit. They're on the same path that we are. They're going to do this for another 15, 20 years. They're not looking to exit. They're looking to die in the seat. Like, that's ultimately what the real ones in this industry are trying to do, is just build, grow, work every day till the end. So it's always amusing watching DraftKings sort of come out and speak after they have these meetings and, drop these little tidbits. What are they worried about? They started from nothing, 10, 12 years ago, the fantasy thing started when they got it. And they're, making $400-500 million a year each, private jets. Who cares? Like, just keep building, have what you have, keep building. You can see their main thing is, again, mergers and acquisitions. So they're picking up a lotto company. They're picking up in-house product. Just keep doing that. Just keep moving along, move the needle. For me, and I've played into their stock a few times in and out, like, their upside is tremendous. They'll get there at the end, as long as they don't trip over themselves as they start worrying about ghosts and boogeymans that aren't really there. So, it's kind of amusing. It gives us something to talk about here, whether it's his insecurities or the company as a whole or whatnot. But they built something fucking great. Like, just keep building, keep doing what you've been doing the last 10 years, and you'll just succeed.
I don't know, to stay on the allusion to heavyweight champions. You don't hear any heavyweight champion talking, or a top contender talking about the guys who are ranked 10th, 8th, whatever. They're only talking about the top guy, right? If DraftKings is a challenger to FanDuel, I mean, I would spend every waking moment thinking, like, what do we got to do to beat FanDuel? What do we got to do to beat them? How do we got to have them? How do we have better product? How do we make our parlay product better than FanDuel's product, which is the best one in the marketplace right now? I never hear, maybe I'm selective and this is only anecdotal, but I never hear FanDuel talking about DraftKings. I guess when you're in the league, you don't give a shit about whoever's behind you.
All right, and on that note, we will go ahead and close up shop for the week. To the audience, whatever the future may or may not hold for consolidation, and whether you think of yourself as a leader or a challenger in this space, thanks as always for making us a part of your week, and we'll catch you next week right back here on Prime Suspects. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at Prime Sportsbook, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.